Hey guys, so welcome to this new video, and in this video we are going to talk about Hobbes. So this is going to be a continuation from Machiavelli, which was our last video in the PSIR crash course. So this is all about me. So if you have been following this channel, if you have been following the PSIR crash course, you might be knowing about me already. If you are new to the channel, please subscribe to it so that I can keep making more of such videos. I need your encouragement for that. So moving on, we'll start with Hobbes today. Now, this is the basic introduction about Hobbes. Okay, so the main thing is that he's regarded to be the first modern thinker. Okay, the first modern thinker and a proponent of the social contract theory. Now, we'll talk about these terms in greater details as we move further into the video. For now, I'll just give you a brief introduction of what Hobbes had to talk about. Okay, so next was the legal rights theory that Hobbes endorsed, right? Because before this, we did not have a concrete idea of the modern legal system. So Hobbes was the first Western political thinker who gave the concept of a legal system. Okay, so the rudimentary structure of the legal system, how it should be, how it should evolve, that came from the work of Hobbes. He also was the progenitor. He was also considered to be one of the forefathers of utilitarianism. So in the context of utilitarianism, the most famous thinker is Jeremy Bentham, and we'll talk about Bentham in some of the later videos. But utilitarianism is considered to have originated in the work of Hobbes. Okay, so we'll see how it in what way he was actually one of the forefathers of utilitarianism. Now, as we talk about in all the videos for Western political thought, I have emphasized on this time and again that you need to be conscious about the time period in which a particular thinker is present. Okay, so when we are talking about Socrates, when we are talking about Plato, when we are talking about Aristotle, or when we are talking about Machiavelli, we are all referring to certain periods of time. So it was the conditions that existed in these periods of time which influenced these thinkers to think in a certain direction, to try and find the solutions to certain problems. So they were all solution finders. They all wanted to find solutions to some problems which were persisting for a long time. Now, in case of Hobbes, he was there in the early half of the 17th century. Okay, and it was in this period that Britain was in a state of chaos. Okay, so there was a lot of civil strife, there was a lot of anarchy, there was a lot of unrest going on, and Hobbes was someone who wanted to find a solution to this problem. So if you remember the previous videos I talked about, so Socrates and Plato, they were worried about the sophist way of teaching. Okay, so similarly with Aristotle, and in Machiavelli's case, he was concerned about the well-being of Italy. Okay, he was concerned about Italy evolving as a nation state. So all of them had a very particular creative purpose in their mind, and with that kind of a purpose they gave their philosophies. So Hobbes also wanted to find a way out of the unrest that Britain was plunged into in this period. So Hobbes wanted to find a way out. Now, according to Hobbes, this was the source of all problems and this was a solution. Okay, so in the rest of the video we'll talk about how he came to this solution. So according to Hobbes, the problems, all this unrest, chaos, and the anarchy, everything, the source was the self-centered and possessive nature of a human being. A human being is so self-centered and possessive that it becomes the source of all problems. This is what Hobbes postulated, and the solution according to him was to create state would be created as a solution. Okay, state did not have any kind of divine sanction or any kind of metaphorical meaning. It was supposed to be created as a solution to cure the problems that were existing in human society as a result of the self-centeredness and possessiveness of human beings. And once the state is created, it had to be given absolute powers. Now we'll see in the later part of the video why absolute powers, why giving a state absolute powers was justified by Hobbes. So as I talked about, it's the period. Okay, so this was the period of scientific revolution. So you might be knowing, if you have read world history, this was the period of Renaissance. This was roughly the period when Industrial Revolution was, it was about to start in some more time. Okay, so Industrial Revolution was to start, right? And it was the age of scientific revolution. Okay, so the impact of science could be felt. So in the video of Machiavelli, I had talked about the fact that Machiavelli, he made religion, he turned religion into a, something that has to be considered in the personal sphere. Okay, religion was personalized by Machiavelli. So we see the movement from there to the scientific era, to which Hobbes belongs. So in the scientific era, it was all about rationality. It was about science. It was about reason. It was about logic. Okay, and Hobbes was all for applying scientific methods to understand politics. So this is what the age of scientific revolution was all about. It was about using these scientific methods to analyze politics and to find solutions to political problems. Now, in this context, Galileo and Rene Descartes, these were the two most famous mathematicians or thinkers who actually influenced Hobbes. Okay, so according to Galileo, Galileo postulated that matter is the ultimate reality, matter is supreme. So matter is constituted by particles, and these particles are in a state of motion. So let's say this is a piece of paper. So this paper is constituted by particles. Okay, so these particles are always in a state of motion. So all those people who have read chemistry, you must have come across all the analysis of atomic structure and chemical bonding. Okay, atomic structure, chemical bonding, and these chapters. So this, what Galileo proposed, this was actually one of the starting points for this kind of scientific analysis, that matter is constituted by particles which are in a state of motion. Okay, the other mathematician who influenced the Hobbes was Rene Descartes. You must be knowing him. For people who have read coordinate geometry, you must have come across his name. Okay, Rene Descartes. Now he proposed 3 steps to use, it's about using the scientific approach in social science. So we all tend to think that this physics, chemistry, maths, they are all they're meant to be a separate science stream, and arts is a separate science stream. Well, that's actually a misnomer, because Rene Descartes, he proposed this scientific method for social sciences. Now how he did that? He proposed 3 steps. Okay, 3 steps. So first is you observe the phenomena. Okay, what is the phenomena that is happening? Then you observe the phenomena, you simplify it, and you find the elemental parts. Okay, so if something is happening, if a cricket match is happening, okay, so let's say this is a cricket match, you have to observe the cricket match and you have to find the elemental parts. What are the parts due to which the process is happening? So in a cricket match, this process is happening because of the cricketers. Okay, so the cricketers on the field, they are playing the game, so that's why the match is happening, so that's why the phenomenon is happening. So this is step 2, you simplify it and you find the elemental parts. Now the third step, that is the final step, is you have to find the cause and effect relationship between these elemental parts. What is the connection between these parts? Okay, so if you have a field, if you have a field where cricket is being played, so there are all these elemental parts. There are 11 players from the bowling team, and there are 2 batsmen, and there is the umpire here, there is another umpire here. Okay, so you have to find what is the cause and effect relationship. In this case, the cause and effect relationship is that this team wants to beat the other team. Okay, so they are in a state of competition. Okay, so this is the cause and effect relationship in this case. So they're in a state of competition. So whatever happens, it's balanced by this sense of competition. So this fellow who is batting here, he wants to score more runs. This fellow who is bowling here, he wants to take a wicket. He does not want to give away the runs. So this is the cause and effect. So if he takes a wicket, then the batsman coming in next has to take a different kind of step. So you see, it's a cause and effect, right? So this is the cause and effect relationship. So once you find that, it becomes easy to simplify the political process and to find solutions to such processes, especially when there are problems. Okay, now what Hobbes did was, he he tried to follow this Descartes approach in social sciences. Now let's say the phenomenon, in this case it would be a political phenomenon. Okay, so in a political phenomenon, the elemental parts are human beings. Just like I told you that in a cricket match, the elemental parts are the cricketers. So in a political phenomenon, let's say it's we talk about elections. Okay, so in an election, the elemental parts are human beings. Now what is the cause and effect relationship? Okay, so you have to boil down the cause and effect relationship to the least common denominator. Okay, so for human beings, human beings are they are, their behavior is actually creating that political phenomenon. So if this is the phenomenon, okay, now this is being created by human behavior. Okay, so human behavior, or when it is aggregated across a certain scale, it leads to this phenomenon. Let's consider that this is election. So now we have to boil it down further. So what constitutes human behavior? Now human behavior is constituted by the human brain. Okay, we behave as our brain tells us to, right? So if our brain tells us that it's a very sad situation, that there is some death in the family, so you behave, behavior reflects that you become sad. Okay, when it's the opposite, when India wins a match, you're supposed to be very glad, you're supposed to be very elated, your brain tells you to do that, and the behavior accordingly reflects that, right? Now when we boil it down even further, how is the brain affected? The brain is affected by the particles inside the brain. Okay, so it's about the movement of the particles inside the brain that actually determines what the brain will, what signal the brain will send to the rest of the human body, and accordingly what behavior the human being will exhibit. So these particles are what are, actually determine finally what kind of political phenomenon is actually happening. And these particles are in a state of motion. Okay, so these are in a state of motion. Now as Galileo said, matter is reality and the constituent particles are in a state of motion. So you see the analogy here, it's completely, like matching. Okay, so these particles, these are what are constituting the phenomenon. Now how are these particles, what determines the movement of these particles? Like how do I know whether this particle is going to move this way or that way? So in this connection, Hobbes, he prescribed that it's dependent on the pain pleasure principle. Okay, so it's the pain pleasure principle that inside the human brain, the particles, they are always attracted towards something that gives them pleasure, and they are always moving away from something that gives them pain. So it's something that simple. Okay, so if you give a human being pleasure, he will move towards it. If you give a human being pain, he will move away from it. Similarly, so when it's elections and you offer some cash to some particular particular voter, then he will feel that it's a source of pleasure, so his particles inside his brain will tell him to accept the cash. So accordingly the particles will move, his brain will tell him to accept the cash, that way he will behave, and that way the political phenomenon will come, that use of money power in politics. Okay, so this is how you simplify it. So as you can see, there is a lot of transition. We move from Plato, and Plato prescribed the use of philosophy. Then we came to Machiavelli. Machiavelli said, no, we have to be conscious about history and human psychology. So he said that the prince should not be, that philosopher king. He should not be an expert in philosophy. He should know history, and he should be aware of human nature, because human nature is cyclical in nature. So these were the two prescriptions of Machiavelli. Now when we come to Hobbes, Hobbes says that no, let's use physics, geometry and psychology. Okay, when we use these three in combination, we get our perfect analysis. Okay, we get the solutions to our problems. So it's all about finding the solutions. Okay, it's all about finding the solutions. So when we were talking about Machiavelli, Machiavelli wanted to guide the prince to rule his people well, to find to create that ideal kingdom. So for that he suggested this, that the prince should know these two things. Similarly, when we talk about Plato, he was all for philosophy, so he was talking about the philosopher king. Okay, here in case of Hobbes, he's all for science. So then Leviathan, this is the the greatest and most well-known work of Hobbes. It literally means a sea monster. Okay, so sea monster, why? Because Hobbes has referred to the state as being the Leviathan. He calls the state as the Leviathan because according to Hobbes, the state has absolute powers. Now we'll see in the next slide why the state is supposed to have absolute powers. Okay, now because of this these kind of views that he had, and he gave absolute powers to the state, initially Hobbes, he was called the monster of Malmesbury. Okay, so initially he was called this, and he was criticized vehemently. Later on, when the when people started getting a comparative analysis of the work Hobbes had done, and with the work that was done by the subsequent scholars, they realized the value of Hobbes' contribution to English philosophy. So they termed him the greatest philosopher ever produced by the English race. Okay, so it's just like, when somebody said that the earth is rotating around the sun, and the sun is not rotating around the earth, so you go ahead and kill him. Okay, that is what happened to someone. Who is that someone? You just do a Google search, you will find out. Okay, and then later day people, they realize, no, this guy was correct. So today we read about him, we read his books, we read about him in class 6, class 7 standard books. Okay, so similarly with Hobbes, initially he was vehemently criticized. Later on, his contributions were properly recognized. Then we come to the social contract tradition. Okay, so this is the main, this is where the social contract tradition actually starts for us in our PSIR syllabus. Earlier, in case of Plato, we had seen that he had talked about state emerging in the organic needs of man. So both Plato and Aristotle, they said that state is natural. Okay, like existence of the state, that is very natural. You cannot live without the state. Man is a social animal, so there is a hierarchy of needs, so there needs to be a hierarchy of institutions. Then when we came to Machiavelli, we saw why state was needed, and he guided the prince according to certain principles. Now there is a complete change in the way Hobbes has approached the creation of state, and that new approach is called the social contract tradition. So we'll read about a number of thinkers who have who have endorsed this social contract tradition, starting with Hobbes. After this, we'll read about other thinkers also. Okay, but Hobbes is the first one that we have to read about. So social contract tradition means that state is created as a contract between people in the society. So initially there were people living in a state of nature. Okay, so this is a theoretical concept which depicts the scenario which was existing before the creation of state. Okay, so when state was not there, let's say when you did not have state as a political community, life at that point of time is described as state of nature. Now in the various scholars who have endorsed the social contract tradition, you will see that they have each described state of nature in a different way, depending upon their own interpretation. According to Hobbes, state of nature, when when state itself was not there. Okay, before state came into existence, it was about a struggle for power. Okay, it was war of all against all, and human life was nasty, poor, brutish, and short. So this, according to Hobbes, was the situation when state did not come into existence. Okay, so because of this, it was strife torn. Okay, so you can see everybody is fighting everybody else. Why? Because there is there is a fight for resources. Okay, so if there is no law in India today, okay, so let's say we have a community here. Let's say this is India. Okay, theoretically, let's say this is India. There are so many people living here, and there is no law. Okay, so there is no law, there is no police, there is no tax, nothing. So the situation will be like everybody is fighting everybody else, and it will be like the might is right principle. So according to Hobbes, this was what used to happen before state came into existence. So to improve this situation, people agreed to get into a contract. Okay, so it would be a contract of all with all. So everybody would be involved in the contract, and state would be created as a third party. Okay, so people would all come together. They would say, okay, we are living in the state of nature, which is, we are in a state of fighting. We are just fighting each other. So let's come into a contract and let's create a third party called state. So this state is a third party. It's an imaginary fictional third party. Okay, and it's the beneficiary of this contract. Now here you have to understand that state is created by man to come out of the pain that is there in the state of nature. So the state of nature is a very painful situation for man. Okay, So to come out of that pain and to gain pleasure, now you can connect it with the use of scientific analysis in social sciences, that the particles in the brain are moving towards pleasure and away from pain. Okay, so the same thing is happening here. So people decide that we have to move away from pain and we have to accept pleasure. So to accept pleasure, they create state, and hence state is an instrument of utility for man. Okay, this is where Hobbes is the one of the forefathers of utilitarianism. Okay, this is how he becomes the forefather of utilitarianism. Now, once state is created, the individual loses all rights. Okay, he loses all rights except the right to life. Everything else is decided by the state. Now, this is a contract. Okay, so let's say this guy says, I'll not give up all my rights. I'll only give up this only one right. I'll give up, the rest I'll take. So if every human being were to decide ki I'll give up this right and keep this for myself, then it would defeat the very purpose of state, because the state of anarchy will still prevail. Okay, state will be dysfunctional, it will not mean anything. So to avoid this problem, the solution is that everybody gives up all the rights except the right to life, which is inalienable. So that means you have to live. Your right to life is inalienable and it cannot be taken away from you except by procedure established by law. So even if state wants someone to die, it has to be by the procedure established by law. So state cannot say ki okay, I don't like your face, you are I sentence you to death. No, that cannot be done. If such arbitrary action is taken by state, then the individual has right to revolt. Okay, so this is Hobbes' prescription for state based on the social contract tradition. So if right to life has to be taken away, it has to be done in the procedure established by law. So if a death sentence has to be given to a person, it must be because he has violated certain laws which have been made by the state. Now this entire theory of Hobbes, it has been criticized by Gandhi, and it has been criticized by Marx as well. Gandhi criticized this because Gandhi was a supporter of anarchism. Now Gandhi wanted a kind of enlightened anarchy in society. Now this enlightened anarchy, it endorsed the concept of individual protest. Okay, so Gandhi, we talk about Gandhi, we refer to non-cooperation movement, we refer to civil disobedience movement, we refer to quit India movement. So Gandhi was he always supported the individual's right to protest. So that's why he criticized this formula given by Hobbes. And according to Marx, we'll study about Marx in details later on. But for now, what you need to know is that Marx held that state is an instrument of exploitation. Okay, state is not something that ensures that society is run on peaceful lines. No, state is an instrument of exploitation, and those who own all the wealth, those who own all the economic resources, they control state, right? And they exploit the ones who do not control such things. Okay, so state is owned by the haves, and it is used to exploit the have nots. So this was what Marx said, right? Now this I've already spoken about, that according to Hobbes, this selfish, materialistic and individualistic nature of human being, this was the source of all problems. And the human nature is guided by pain and pleasure. Just like when you are seeing a political phenomenon and you are breaking it down into constituent parts, you analyze the cause and effect between the parts, and then you come to the conclusion that it is all dependent on the particles inside the human brain and the response, and how these particles respond to outside stimulus. Okay, now in the human nature, it's passion that actually dominates, even though there is reason also is present. So even if reason is present, so you have passion and you have reason inside the human nature, but in most cases it is passion that dominates. Okay, so because passion dominates, an individual human being, he is not able to appreciate or comprehend the pain pleasure principle when it is applied for the others. So for himself, he will want all the best things because he wants pleasure, all the pleasure he wants, but he will not appreciate the fact that the guy living beside him, he is also he is also in search of pleasure. So this guy, because of his excessive individualism and because of the dominance of passion, he will not consider the pain pleasure theory for others. Okay. Now here, in this case, all men have similar unlimited desires. So all men are equal. This is what Hobbes specified, that there is no difference between human beings. They have all the same desires and all are equal. They are all fighting for limited resources. Now, because they are all fighting for limited resources, what happens is, the guy sitting besides me, he becomes a source of insecurity. Okay, he becomes a source of insecurity, and this gives rise to security dilemma. So just like you have 100 seats in your in a particular college, so and everybody wants to get admitted in the college, then what happens is, the seats are limited, but the number of contestants will be, let's say, 1 lakh. So all these 1 lakh people, they all view each other with a lot of envy. They will not want the other guy, the guy sitting beside them in that admission line, to get the seat instead of them. So this is the same logic that is working here. There are limited resources but unlimited desires, because man is only working on the pain pleasure principle. Now this is all about state, that Hobbes had to say. Okay, state is the supreme authority. There is nothing above the state. So as I said, all the people, they come together and they create state, and there is nothing above it. It's the supreme authority. It's the sovereign. Okay, so it's the sovereign. Now laws are the commands of the sovereign. So this is where he actually comes up with the legal theory of rights. According to Hobbes, only those laws are actually law in true sense which are made by the state. Okay, so a law is a law in a true sense if it is made by the state. Why? Because state has the power to punish. Okay, so in this context he said that covenants without swords are nothing but words. So the state, the sovereign, it should have the power to punish someone who disobeys the law. So if I steal, if I'm a thief, if I'm a dacoit, then in that case the state should have the power to punish me. The state should have the resources, like state has the police, state has some other kind of enforcement machinery. So these resources are there with the state to punish the people who disobey the law. So this is why it's the true form of law. Now you see, this is what legal theory of rights actually is, and this is where the modern legal rights theory, the foundation was laid here. Okay, so we'll study more about the legal theory of rights when we when we go to paper 1A, the other parts, political theory part. Okay, for now you can just you can just understand that Hobbes was one of the progenitors of this legal rights theory. And according to him, natural law, okay, natural law, we'll read about natural law later on. Natural law was based upon reason. Okay, so reason, according to Hobbes, it was not enough, because in human nature passion is the dominating quality. Okay, so since passion dominates, natural law is not an effective law as such, so he called them articles of peace. Okay, and they are ineffective, they're not good enough. Now when we talk about law, we also talk about rights. So according to Hobbes, rights are not possible in the state of nature. So earlier I showed you that in the state of nature, it's about everybody fighting everybody else, because there is no law, and there are no rules, so nobody knows what to do, and they all are trying to fight for the limited resources which are available. So they're all fighting. It's a war of all against all. Okay, so it's all versus all. So in this kind of a situation, no rights are possible. This is what Hobbes says. Rights are possible only when state is present. So from this situation, you create a state, and state, it creates some sort of order. It creates laws. If you do this, if you do that, you will be punished. So that creates a sense of order. And when you create that sense of order, then you can guarantee rights to the individuals. So if you follow the law, then the state will ensure that anyone who breaks the law is punished. So it's like an algorithm. You follow the law, you preserve the order, and you get the rights. So rights, law, order. Okay, so it's like it's like a cycle. Okay. Now liberty is where law is silent. This is in the same context, that man is free to the extent the sovereign permits him. So if the law made by the state says that the person has to work from 9 a.m. in the morning to 6 p.m. in the evening, then the person is bound to work in this time period. Okay, he's not free. He's not free in this time period. He has to work beyond this period. He's free, but in this time period he has to work because it's a law made by state and he has to follow it. So liberty is dependent on what law is made by the state. So liberty is where law is silent. If there is no law made on it, or if law specifically provides for that scope of liberty. So if the law says that one day in a week you can sleep at home, so then that is liberty. But if the law does not say this, and if the law says that 7 days in a week you have to work, then you have to follow it. Okay, so this is what Hobbes had to say. And again, this was the basis of the legal theory of rights. So this was all for Hobbes, and I'll try and complete the entire Western political thought series as soon as possible, so that once we complete this, we can start with the political theory part and Indian political thought part. So please stay tuned to the channel. I'll upload the next video very soon, and thank you for staying with me.